The last exercise that you were looking at was a description, or asking you for a description of what you think functional foods actually are, and you were given a multiple choice quiz, and it turned out all of the answers were correct. In fact, functional foods have been growing steadily for the last 15 years or so, and as you can see from the graph, in terms of a products really that are in the billions of dollars. One kind of functional food would be milk, of course, but which has added to it vitamin D for what could be called invisible fortification. In the province of Quebec here in Canada, Arnold Steinberg, who was involved with owning and running a grocery chain, combined with, I should say, Charles Scriver, an eminent researcher in genetics here at McGill, to insist that the province add vitamin D to the milk, and that was in fact carried out. Other ones that you could add would be probiotic bacteria. Dr. Schwartz talked about the efficacy of omega-3 fatty acids. Some say they're important, others say maybe not so important, but they are put in foods, and the charges of those foods are certainly significant. In fact, in Canada right now, there are 300 companies that provide these kinds of products. There are many movements, particularly in North America, about food. Some you might find interesting, and some are a little bit unusual. Freeganism, an anti-consumerism group, will simply go to the back doors of restaurants and find food that's been thrown out that's perfectly good to eat, and they can, in fact, maintain themselves very well on this. This is certainly in cities. Other aspects of freeganism would be to take a look at dumps and find actually furniture that's been thrown out and the like. So freeganism is not, I'd say, a hugely popular group, but they certainly, I mean, a group that's very prevalent, but they exist. There's another movement, mainly in California, or at least substantially in California, of people who want to eat raw and organic foods only, called the Rawsome food movement. And signs that crop up, "I drink raw milk, arrest me, make my day," that kind of idea. Well, this was from the New Yorker magazine called A Raw Deal a few months ago, and this was the quote. I'll just read it quickly. "In the meat cooler, there were raw bison kidneys, spleen, hearts, and testicles, which customers often sliced open and ate on the spot. We had some real vampires going through here." Well, it's popular enough that the well-known actor John Cusack has a personal chef that's been, apparently, according to the article, forbidden to shop anywhere else. And so these are rather esoteric, isolated, small numbers of people who do this, but the Rawsome of the actors, but the Rawsome food movement is actually a pretty big one. And there's another movement that is, I think, really important and has more appropriateness, I think, for feeding many, many people, and that's the idea of consuming insects. Of the 7 billion people on the planet, 1.5 billion, roughly, it might be a little more or a little less, actually regularly consume insects because they're a fine source of protein, and there's about 1,500 species of what are considered to be edible insects. This is a rather interesting picture. It looks like insect sushi, one might guess, with rather intact insects on the tops for decoration. I'm not sure whether this was a real dish or whether this was just for advertisement, but it emphasizes the main point. My two colleagues, Drs. Joe Schwartz and Ariel Fenster, and I went to the Edinburgh International Science Festival, and on that menu was a science program one evening where they offered insects for food. My two colleagues partook. I was not interested and had to publicly say why I didn't want to, but it's, I think, for the same reason many North Americans might not want to consume insects. There was, I think, as I recall, a kind of a mush that was made of a caterpillar. It just didn't seem too enticing. Grasshoppers are, in fact, very popular in many different countries. Whether grasshoppers are in favor or not is another story. Well, it turns out that late last year, McGill students were awarded a $1 million Hult Prize for a plan to transform insects into food. One of the major parts of this entire proposal that they made for this competition, of which 10,000 students participated, Hult is a Swedish entrepreneur and industrialist who provides this prize. And I guess one of the lime cricket chips was one of the food items that they talked about. They were students from McGill's business school, and they are shown here getting their prize, presented, of course, in this case, that's why they got the press, by former President Clinton of the United States. And they're all 5 pretty happy campers right there with that prize. And this is money that they can now try to start a company with. And the idea is to farm insects, convert them into flour and other processes that will make food more available to a wider audience. People have opinions about what foods are good to eat. There are many, many meat eaters. We're going to ask you eventually what percentage of you are totally vegetarian or vegan versus meat eaters, but the meat eaters, and particularly in provinces in Canada that have a lot of meat to grow, there's plenty of room for all God's creatures right next to the mashed potatoes. This might be a little harsh, but that simply was a sign that was put up. Another one that was put up that is, I think, interesting, let's just say. Barbecue is very famous, particularly in the southern parts of the United States, but in general, all over North America. Special tonight, vegetarians eat for free, ha ha ha, with the Little Pigs stand for barbecue.